So this is the third month that I have done the webinar style. Months before that, I was doing once a month, more of like a support group, but I moved to this format of more of a teaching just so that it could be recorded and then people could watch it on demand. So this, I'm going to just do a brief introduction of me, but I'm going to blow through this. So my name is Danielle Liu, and first and foremost, I'm a Jesus lover. I'm a wife. I'm a mom. I'm a certified professional coach. I am active in my community with a program called Overcomers Outreach. That is a 12-step Christ-centered recovery program similar to the Celebrate Recovery. So we work on any hurt, hang up, or habit. So it could be grief, it could be food, it could be any annoying habit that someone has. And then, of course, addictions and things like that. So we've done that since about July, and this is the second group that we've started in our community, and my husband and I are both active in that. I'm a licensed therapist, and my specialization is trauma, mostly with Christians and from a holistic perspective. And then I am a former addictions counselor. So that was what I did early in my career after my bachelor's degree. And then my master's degree training was on co-occurring conditions. So those with addictions and a secondary problem like depression or anxiety. I'm also certified in brain spotting, which is similar to EMDR. I'm also EMDR trained, but primarily use brain spotting at this point. Gottman level trained. I'm a prepare and enrich facilitator. I still do work with New Life Ministries as a coach, therapist, and speaker. I do a weekly blog, speak whenever and wherever I can to bring glory to God and bring hope to the hopeless, to help set the captives free. And I have over 2 decades of personal experience. So my personal story is that I am a survivor. I'm a trauma survivor from childhood trauma. I have survived intimate betrayal. I have survived my own personal addictions and have almost 20 years of sobriety. Praise the Lord, a lot of one day at a time. And just have been blown away by God's faithfulness and restoration and beauty for ashes. So I have a really strong faith because I've had lots of fiery trials, and God has never ceased to amaze me at how he does, bring what the enemy meant for evil for good. And I've just experienced that time and time again. So I have a really strong faith. I know that I'm loved by God, and this is a really dark, fallen, icky world, and he is preparing a beautiful place for us in heaven. So that is me. And all of my work is rooted in scripture and science. I'm really passionate about that, about educating people on bridging the gap between scripture, which is not in contradiction with science if it's good science. Science is always going to confirm the Bible, and the Bible's science. If it doesn't, then it's not science. It's bogus. I don't know where some of these things come from. But and I do that to equip believers to have healthy, fulfilling relationships with self, so that you can be free to love God and others and to live in freedom, claiming the promises of God on this side of heaven. Yes, we have a lot of promises for when we get to heaven, but there's also a lot of promises for on this side of heaven. Abundant life is for us now, but we need to really fight to get there. It's certainly not easy. And this comes from, the greatest commandment is to love your Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, soul, strength, and soul. And the second, like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. And so how do we get there to love? We have to be working with both biblical principles as well as science, because we do live in the physical world, and science is just a study of the physical things of the world. And so, our body there's science out there that if you eat too much sugar, you're going to get diabetes. And so what I do now in the intimate betrayal space and helping women and couples and all the work that I do is really helping them to understand that it is not in contradiction to the Bible when we're stepping into recovery. It is what we are called to do. Recovery is synonymous of sanctification and becoming more like Christ. And so, yes, when I'm walking in the Spirit, I am free, but my flesh is unruly and wants to continue to try to put me back in that fight or flight and put me back in that survival, which is essential on this side of heaven, because we are going to be attacked by, terrible things, people and situations and viruses and all these things. So we do need to have a body that knows how to respond to that. And we need to be led by the Spirit, and we need to be able to differentiate and integrate that process. They're not mutually exclusive. So I'm really passionate about helping people to understand trauma is the biggest thing and how it impacts us. So I have lots of groups and different things that I do to accomplish those, the goals and the mission of my practice. And I'm very focused on body, mind, and spirit in all my interventions because we are made of body, mind, and spirit. And so if we're only addressing the body and we're not dealing with the mind, or we're not dealing with the word of God, we're not going to get too far. If we're only in church and we're only dealing with the word of God and we're ignoring altogether science and the recoveries of, or I'm sorry, the principles of recovery and how our brain works and trauma and all these things, then we're incomplete because they do need to go together. So I'm really passionate about that and really help people to understand the importance of it. Okay, so now to the topic at hand, which is the timing of when we do couples work in intimate betrayal. So what I want to first say is prevention is always the best medicine, right? But this is not always possible. But prevention meaning that I'm really passionate now about talking to my kids about asking questions. When my daughter started dating her current boyfriend, I said, make sure you ask him, make sure he doesn't use pornography. I mean, I'm just outright, have him take his attachment style quiz. Talk about these things just like they're kitchen table conversations. I want to normalize these kinds of conversations. So, doing premarital counseling above and beyond just check, check, check. Okay, this is what we have to do for the pastor to marry us, but really digging deep. So, obviously, we don't, if you've already been through intimate betrayal, we're past this prevention, but that is always the best medicine for anything. Okay. The other thing to know about the timing of couples work is most people wait 2.5 to 3 years before seeking help. So when couples get married and they're noticing, hey, we don't communicate too well, or we keep fighting about the same things over and over, or, whatever the reason, whatever problem, it used to be 6 years. That's what the research said from the Gottmans, that couples waited 6 years with a problem before they sought help. So we're getting better. That's a good thing. I think with technology and the new generation being more open and with the lowered stigma, maybe of seeking help. I'm not sure, but then what happens is people come to us. I'll say us as the helping community, therapists, coaches, etc., and there is a huge crisis. And so, of course, intimate betrayal would fall into that category, or an addiction gets discovered or disclosed. And so now we're really having to deal with that crisis first. We can't even get to the other stuff that may have been going on. That's really what we have to deal with. So this is more of an encouragement. Again, if you're watching this already having been through intimate betrayal, keep this in mind for the people around you, your own kids, your own grandkids, really normalizing seeking help before it gets too out of hand. So that way we can hopefully interject. Now, if there is an addiction, there's, people are not going to stop addiction until they're ready to stop addiction. And so my story, we were in therapy. So the other side of that is we were in therapy, but we weren't in the right help. And I don't know. I don't know what would have been different, but we went to therapist after therapist after therapist, but the big elephant in the room wasn't addressed because it wasn't exposed, which was his multiple addictions. And so in that, then it was, kind of the garden variety marriage help, communication, have more empathy for his back pain. What role do you, play in this? What part of your past is showing up now? Those kinds of things. Um, so yes, we sought help. I drove that most of the time. I think women are driving that, and a lot of people, and I'm stereotyping here, but a lot of men will not go to therapy until there is a crisis or it's like marriage or divorce or get help. So sometimes I wonder with this statistic, is it because it took that long before the other partner, whether male or husband or wife, was willing to go to therapy? And then the other question in terms of the timing of and the things to consider with intimate betrayal recovery and when to do couples work, it really depends on who you're asking. And this goes with a lot of things. You could have 6 therapists in the room, and therapists could be we have our marriage and family therapist, we have our licensed clinical social workers, we have our LP, what is that, LCP, LPC, I think the licensed professional counselors. Each of those, so those are different licensures, and then within those different licensures, they have their own clinical orientation. So what they subscribe to as being their school of thought or their practice. And so different licensure and then different ethical codes, very similar, but different ethical codes. And then you have the let's say the psychodynamic, psychoanalytical, like that's the Freud. There's still people out there who practice that. That's kind of that stereotypical laying on the couch, be in therapy for the rest of your life, seeing what just happens to come to surface. Um, there's not as many of that kind of modality, but there's lots of different types of opinions and theories about therapy and about couples therapy also. So this question of who are you asking? So this is, you're here. So this is my answer to this question based on my experience, but just know there could be someone else who is going to be like, I don't agree with that at all. That's fine. This is, you're talking to me. So I just wanted you to know. And I am currently going through the Gottman's specialized training on affair recovery. And the Gottmans are the gurus in the field of um, relationships, and they do a lot of evidence based stuff. So they're really highly esteemed because they are so research focused. They're both doctors. And so to get a doctorate, you have to do research, and so they have just done so much research in the field and contributed so much beneficial information. And so I was actually just heard from Julie Gottman through going through this training. She is a trauma specialist, and I never knew that. And so I'm Gottman level 1 certified, and I didn't realize that her background is really strong in trauma. And their position is that you shouldn't be talking about a marriage issue in individual therapy, that will actually lead to divorce. Now, even that, who am I to go against the Gottmans, right? Like they are, the gurus in the field, but they didn't really unpack that any further. And so if you would just take that statement and run with it, you're missing a lot of nuances to that. Now, they will say they do not do couples work with a couple if the affair has not ended, or the one person isn't committed to the marriage. Both people have to be committed fully to the marriage and no active affairs and no secrets. So they do provide that caveat. But there's other factors, I believe, and I haven't been able to take a deep dive from the Gottman's perspective anyway on what their position is on the other factors. But I will say that, and I'm going to get into sometimes it's not so much the timing of couples work, but what we're doing in couples work. And so I'm going to unpack that a little bit. But what else do I want to say about this? I think that's it for this section here. So here are some important questions that we need to consider to get some clarity before making a decision about couples work. So number 1 is he's struggling with an addiction or, and I'm using air quotes, just sinful behavior. So if there is an addiction, the reason why we need to get name that, because the treatment or the how you address that is going to be different than how you address, let's say, a one-time affair. So if he has an addiction, then that opens up a whole nother process of things that he needs to do to manage and arresting this addiction and the work that needs to go into that. So how do we decipher, is this an addiction or is this, just a sinful, hurtful betrayal situation? And that is going to need to be examined through questioning and through assessments. And um, I notice a trend in the intimate betrayal space because there's coaches and there's therapists, and both can do really great work. And you can have a coach that's better than a therapist in terms of helpfulness. And so it's not always just the training, but you could also have a coach who is not no, able to be able to name that there's something else going on, a secondary diagnosis. And so in the field, I just noticed addiction is just thrown around for all of the intimate betrayal, the sexual integrity issues. It's like they're just called addicts. And because I'm a former addictions counselor, that kind of bugs me because I don't think that we should be calling people addicts without a formal assessment. I think it's irresponsible. And I think and so I really like, there's someone in the field named Bill Herring. He calls it problematic sexual behavior. And I really like that, even though it's easier to just say addiction. Problematic sexual behavior captures all of it without putting someone in a box of having an addiction. Because I think what happens then is if everybody's labeled an addict, but not all of the men or the betrayers have an addiction, they're being asked to do the same thing that the true addicts are asked to do, but it might not be appropriate. It's like you don't put a non-diabetic on diabetic medicine just because. And so I think I have a concern about that. So that is an important question to consider, though, of is it an addiction or is it just sinful behavior? When somebody comes into me, I usually ask in early on in the couples work or in my men's group, the restoring empathy through intimacy, or I'm sorry, restoring intimacy through empathy. I'll ask them, do you call this an addiction? So if they call it an addiction, I will absolutely call it an addiction. But I'm not going to argue with them. I'm going to say, yeah, because addicts are usually the last one to know that they have an addiction. So I go with that, but I don't like to I don't think it's appropriate for me to tell somebody that they are an addict unless there is a full assessment that has gone on with a history and all that stuff, which coaches cannot do because they shouldn't be doing clinical things. So that's an aside, but something important to consider. And then is it just one addiction or is it multiple? Because sometimes, in my husband's case, he had an opiate addiction, but then he also had the pornography addiction. And so they both have to be addressed because a lot of times if someone it's very, very common for someone to have multiple addictions. And if you only treat one and not the other, you're not really in recovery, to be honest. And then what happens is when somebody is in true recovery, sometimes these other things will crop up. Like somebody stops doing pornography, but then maybe the food intake goes up, or maybe the alcohol use goes up, or marijuana, or something like that. So now we're just changing the coping skill. And so we're not truly walking in freedom. And now, is one less destructive than the other? Yeah. And so sometimes we have to go with that. We have to kind of work with that and meet people where they are. So, but those are things we need to know. Is there a co-occurring condition? So again, co-occurring condition can be anything. It could be a mood disorder, depression, bipolar. It could be a personality disorder. Narcissism gets thrown around a lot. There's definitely a lot of narcissistic traits with certainly with people who are struggling with addictions because they mimic. When someone is in addiction, they are very self-centered and non-considerate and non-empathetic and all of that. Sometimes we're dealing with attachment wounds, though. The avoidant attachment types can also look very narcissistic. So we really want to just kind of have an idea. We want to be working with someone that we're confident that they can be considering these other things. If we can, because if we take care of the addiction, sure, but then they continue in their avoidant attachment or they continue in their narcissistic, tendencies, you're still not going to feel any safer. You're still not going to want to connect with that person. So they really all, it all needs to be out and it all needs to be addressed. And then the question that's important to consider is he willing to get into recovery? And if he's not, so cliche, but we can lead a horse to water, but we can't make it drink. But what we can do is we can ask, why not? Why aren't you willing to get into recovery? And sometimes we can work with this. Maybe there's some misunderstanding. Maybe there's some church theology that is incorrect. And with a little bit of open mindedness, sometimes I can really work with people. Like I said, was talking earlier about how a leader in my church was really skeptical of psychology and counselors and things. And I said, for good reason, we need to use discernment. There's a lot of really wacky cuckoo stuff out there. So we do need to be using discernment, but also, I hate this expression, but we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Some people are then it's like, well, now the enemy's winning because you've completely shunned away something that could be really, really helpful because of some bad apples or some, bad experiences. So, but we need to figure out if he's not willing to get into recovery or to do the work or to change, then we have to work with that. And how we work with that is going to be different than if he is willing to step into the work. And then hugely important is, do you feel safe? So emotionally, physically, and financially. Because again, this has to be assessed to determine what kind of couples work we're going to be doing. And if there's not safety, then we absolutely have to establish safety first and foremost. And then, what does that look like? And, boundaries and some, if there's domestic violence, then we've absolutely got to deal with that ASAP. That's more of like yeah, no, not non-negotiable. Um, and again, that safety piece, when we get into more granular about what we do in couples work, that is an important question because one of the things that I didn't finish this thought about, and it was missing something, but when I was talking about Julie Gottman and her approach for couples work, she recommends that you actually do the trauma work in the coupleship when possible. And um, so part of the training is her observing her and John with a couple different couples, and she's actually doing the trauma work with both of them present. And I have taken some specialized training from an EMDR training on doing that within coupleship. And then I have been doing that myself in my practice with brain spotting with couples with some pretty good outcomes. And so I was like, okay, great. Like I feel I'm glad to have the stamp of approval from the Gottmans of doing this trauma work in the coupleship, in the couple session. And really, so I'm doing the trauma work or, processing with someone and the partner is there as an observer. But again, if both people do not feel safe, we're not going to be doing. So we have to first consider, are they both safe in this space to do this kind of deeper work? And they both have to be safe. So I always get permission from both before I would enter into that processing with a couple. And then is divorce a possibility? That's another important question to consider because, and honestly, I hate to say this, but when the marriage is, rocky and, it is a possibility, right? And so the reason why that's an important consideration is because I usually coach or in my therapy clients, whichever, like go talk to someone, a divorce attorney in your state to just gather information. Hopefully you will never have to use it. But it is good to know your rights, to know do's and don'ts of what to do and what not to do, because we don't know, when the relationship is rocky and we're asking for change and they're resisting it, for all we know, they might say, well, I'm done. Right. And then we're left, we don't want to have to go find an attorney and ask questions in a crisis state. So again, prevention is always the best medicine. So is proactivity versus having to make a reactive decision to try to deal with whatever crisis you just got hit with. So if divorce is a possibility, which it's always a possibility, get information and just find out because it's different from state to state. So do not just ask your friend over in, another state, hey, who's the attorney you talk to? What did they tell you to do? Don't do that because you don't know in your state what those laws are. They could be very, very different. Okay. So this is a visual representation of um, all the moving parts. I mean, the complexity of what is happening. And so when we talk about recovery, whose recovery are we talking about? So we've got his recovery, and then we've got her recovery, and then the coupleship, and then even the family, if there's kids being affected, if there's, other family members who are involved. So there's a lot of moving parts here. So what she is working on is her recovery is going to look different. Yes, there's going to be some crossover, but her recovery is going to look different than the things he needs to be doing for his recovery, particularly if there is an addiction or a dual diagnosis that he's going to be needing to do some things. If he's the betrayer, then he does need to, I think the word is equanimity. He has more of a responsibility, because, it's like if somebody punches me in the face, yeah, we were both there. Um, but you punched me in the face. So you need to pay for my medical bills, or, if I have to go to the doctor, you need to take responsibility for fixing the harm that you just caused. Same with intimate betrayal. Yeah, I might have been mouthy. I might have given you a dirty look. I might have whatever, but that did not give you a right to punch me in the face. And so you have to now take care of that, because first of all, that's assault. That's illegal. And granted, I maybe shouldn't have been, being mouthy, but now you crossed a line. You actually broke the law, or they actually broke the covenant, right? If we're talking about marriage and stepping out in an affair or something. Um, so the responsibility is different for providing safety for him because of the harm caused. There is a difference between hurt and harm. We all hurt each other's feelings. We're humans. I, might have quirky things, or, don't put, make the bed all the time. Whatever it is that I do that gets on my husband's nerves, that might be hurting his feelings. But there is a difference between the harm done when there is deception, when there is addiction, when there is lust, when there is a betrayal. We're not talking about the same thing. So our level of responsibility in that is very, very different. And the Bible even talks about some sins lead to death. Some sins are, sins against the body in the case of lust, and some um, sins are, where I want to go with that. Some sins, it all hurts. It all hurts God. It all hurts, people. But the consequences of all our sins, that's a word I was looking for. The consequences of our sin and our imperfections aren't all the same. Some things carry a lot more weight and consequences than others. So that is just all the different moving parts. And then this is what, if he has an addiction, there's a lot for him to do. Not all of this might apply to someone who had a one-time indiscretion, or if it wasn't an addiction, but there's still a lot of this that he does need to do. First and foremost, breakthrough denial. I'm actually not going to read this to you. If you want a copy of this, I can give it to you. But there's just, the bottom line is there's a lot. And so when I do my restoring intimacy through empathy, I don't know why I can't get that right tonight. Restoring intimacy through empathy group, I start with, right after introductions, what are you in recovery from? And we have this great discussion, because a lot of them, they'll just be, oh, I betrayed my wife, or, oh, I have a problem with porn or whatever. And then we build on that list. And then I get them to see, oh no, you actually have a lot more to recover from: attachment wounds, trauma, shame, repairing her heart, learning how to communicate like a man, all these things. And so we take this really small list and we make it really big, whether it's an addiction or not. There's a lot more to do than just become a trustworthy human. And because the way to do that is there's actually a lot to do. So, first and foremost, though, is sobriety. So when we get to the timing of couples work, if he's not sober, then that has to be the first thing. So if he's still actively in addiction, or there is an active problem going on. Not that we can't do couples work, but again, the focus is going to be totally different because it needs to be really to share with him the impact of his choices on himself and on her and on the family, and really to get some buy-in, I guess, if we want to put it that way, of like, no, you do need sobriety because you're not going to have me. If you've ever seen the show Intervention, that's kind of what it is. It's like sometimes people, it's either the drug or me, like, or, I'm not supporting you anymore. I'm not bailing you out. And because usually people do not change addiction, again, if we're talking about addiction, until they get the gift of desperation. Nobody changes a behavior that they have been doing for a long time unless they have a compelling reason to do that, because recovery is a lot of work. And so if people are justifying and minimizing or in denial of their problem, there's no problem. Why do you solve the problem? And so there really does have to be buy-in of, no, this is a problem. And so that's what the first step of any recovery program is, AA, NA, CODA, any 12-step program, is we admitted we were powerless over fill in the blank, and our lives had become unmanageable. And so really having to um, have people come to terms with, yes, they are actually powerless. And here's all the attempts that you've made to try, and here's all the people you've hurt and all those things. So anyway, without sobriety, we're not really going to get too far. With sobriety, with ownership, with actively working a program, then we can definitely start working on these other things, and the work changes in the coupleship. And let's see, anything else I want to highlight from this? Definitely, if there's any cycles of abuse, I've added that to my betrayal recovery group that I do for women, where I give them a workbook and that I created from things that are important in recovery. And one of that is a power and control wheel from the domestic violence resources, because that needs to be named. If there's abuse going on, whether it's um, even just emotional manipulation. Leslie Bernick has the emotionally destructive marriage. I actually have that quiz in the workbook because, again, if there's abuse going on, that changes the dynamic of what we're doing and when and what her recovery is going to look like and all the things. So if there's that, we've got to name it. We've got to get control of that first. Let me see what else on here I want to. A lot of times, men not in recovery, they don't understand men and women's bodies are different. Surprise, surprise. But even like how men view sexuality is very different. Again, no surprise. But a lot of times they want to go straight to that. They want to go straight to the restoration of sexuality. And that's not going to cut it, right? Because as we know, we've got to provide safety. We've got to, get all these, there's an intimacy pyramid, and we've got to get all these other things in place first before we're going to get into that healthy sexuality. And so sometimes there's a power dynamic there when, she's not feeling safe and he's complaining because he's not, having sexual intimacy with her, and he doesn't feel loved and she doesn't feel safe. And so that in couples work, we can really break down that and like, oh, what needs to happen when, and so a lot of education around that. Um, and let's see, what else here do I want to highlight? I think that's it for now. So what does her recovery look like? And so I created this little roadmap, and it's probably super small on the screen. So um, and I do give this in my betrayal group. This is in anyone who I'm coaching. I now have an assessment. There's like a goal. We develop goals around this by me asking a lot of questions to figure out where my clients are in the different phases. And then the work that we do is going to be different depending on where they are in the phases. Now, this map here is specifically for the one who has been betrayed. This is not specific to the coupleship, but what the couple's work looks like needs to support the work that she's doing to get safety. So pre-discovery is down here at the start, and then it works its way up. And so then you get phase one, you get discovery. And so now the focus there in phase one is stabilization of triggers to deal with any kind of emotional gaslighting, manipulation, deception. So I'm helping women who need help with boundaries or identifying what they need or how to even ask their husbands to get into counseling or coaching or something like that, and how to take care of your body, your physical body, what needs to happen there, and mind and spirit. So until safety is established, we're going to stay in phase one. Now you can progress through these phases with or without him doing the work, or you can be still in the relationship and still progress through these phases depending on the situation and depending on the person and depending on a lot of factors. But you can actually be in a marriage where he's not doing work, and you can actually get to phase three, which is moving on and accepting I can't change him. I can't make him get into recovery, but I'm going to still live my life as best as I can with this situation and still kind of always be grieving that it could be so much better. It could be so much different if he would do the work. But we have to work with the reality that we're in, and so um, but phase two it's a long, 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 hard road. That's where the most of the grieving, processing the pain, because you're not in that like hyper arousal as much when you get out of phase one into phase two. This is more of like a maybe more depression and yes, some anxiety with triggers, pops of triggers here and there. But it's generally just like the dust has settled a bit and the reality really sets in of like, this happened and this sucks. I wish this didn't happen. And then really doing some trauma work in this place, and, actively grieving, leaning into it. That now, again, the couple's work is going to look different. If he's in recovery, then you can kind of move through these phases together as a couple. But if he's not in recovery, then you're moving on and he's kind of down here somewhere. Um, and you're not going to be able to be grieving with him, which is unfortunate because ideally we can grieve what could have been together and then creating this new future together. So that's an ideal scenario. But phase three is more of that post-traumatic growth. That's now sometimes people, this somewhere between 2 and 3 is actually where we definitely need to start leaning into those family of origins things, um, where what from my childhood trauma, my own attachment wounds is now kicking or has kicked up because of the betrayal. So if there was no attachment wounds prior from your family of origin, from your own story, you'd still have trauma. It would stand on its own. And if you did have some things that weren't resolved from your family of origin, attachment wounds, things like that, it got exacerbated. It got blown up. So what might have been like a little bit of a bonfire is now a full blown forest fire. And so while I hate that because I know how hard that is when all that stuff is kicked up, I also want to say what a blessing that is. And please don't, um, should want to throw something through the screen at me, but if that stuff is there and we never deal with it, then we're not breaking those generational curses. We're not breaking those generational patterns. That we're just kind of like living status quo with the crap that got rolled down to us, and then this crap that's going to roll down to our kids. And so when everything blows up and we're seeing, dealing with this betrayal, would we have ever even dealt with our childhood stuff? I don't know. Right. And so, but I do know that for me, because of the trauma from all of the discoveries and the things that I've walked through, I've actually found way more freedom through the other things that had nothing to do with my husband. And so that is a gift. And that's what the enemy meant for evil, God using for good, because I'm not carrying this stuff. Like I said, I'm talking to my kids now about this stuff. My eyes are wide open, not in a fearful, hyper vigilant way, but I am very vigilant. I am very aware, and I am, really passionate about trying to change these generational curses. I talk to my kids about childhood stuff in in an appropriate way. But it doesn't have to be this way. That's kind of what I want them to know. This is my before Christ life. This is my after Christ life. And it does not have, we don't have to do it the way that, my family did. It can be different. So that is a blessing in that, but we don't do that real deep internal, deep dive into our family of origin story unless it naturally comes up and it's getting in the way. Then we definitely want to lean into that, but we don't want to leave any stone unturned. And so usually what happens, um, is women will, their husbands will get into recovery, or this is how I've experienced it. Husbands get into recovery, things are better, and they're kind of living their life, but then she'll realize like something just still doesn't feel right with me. Like I want more freedom. And so they'll circle back and say, he's fine. We've been doing our recovery thing, but I want more freedom. And that's where we kind of open back up this, what is the negative cognition now? What's getting in your way now? And so again, this is all talking about her work. Could this be done in coupleship? Absolutely. If there is safety between a couple and we're doing couples work and she's been triggered by him, um, like, I'll give you an example if I can articulate this quickly. My husband and I were driving to dinner last night. We went to dinner and then we went grocery shopping together. And I was telling him a story on the way, and he just kept going, "Oh, look at those deer. Look at those deer." And on the second time, I said, "Look," I said, um, what that is bringing up for me from my childhood is that I was to be seen and not heard, and kids don't matter. And I have to be doing something really significant or magnificent in order to be seen or heard. And me just talking with you about, the story that I'm telling you, I know that's not what you mean, but that's what it feels like in my system, is that what I'm saying to you doesn't matter and you don't care. And so then he's like, "No, it was not that. I just, it's just a deer." And I said, "Well, now you're invalidating me." So when we do this work, I wasn't mad at him. I wasn't reactionary. I was just very proactive. And I have enough self-awareness through tons and tons and tons of work that I'm able just to communicate that to him. How that used to look is I would stew. I would be like, because I'm a vacillator attachment, I'd be like, he doesn't love me, I'm not important. And I would go in my head for a long time and he'd be like, "What's wrong with you?" And I'd be like, "Nothing." And then I'd flip out on him, at some other point, and he'd be like, "Whoa, I knew you were upset and you wouldn't tell me anyway." Now I just stay ahead of it. Prevention's always the best medicine. Now I just say, "Hey, this is what's going on." So with that, we could, if we were in couples therapy right now, we could take that to a therapist who would say, "Hey, I must still have this, like, I don't have value. I don't have, what I say isn't important or significant." And, and then they could do EMDR with me with my husband present because he's safe now. And I bet you now my husband will probably just cry if I would be processing my trauma with him there with me and me really into the process. He would be so empathetic, and that would actually really help me heal my wounds. We would not do that if he was not a safe person. I would not even think about having him in the same room with me as I'm processing trauma. So that's just another way that we could say like the timing of what we do when. So, again, the timing of couples work is more about what is the work that we're doing. That's a typo there. What the work is. Oh yeah, what the work is versus when we do it. So we can do couples work at any point in this, but what we're doing is going to be different. So if let's give an example. So some couple comes in, she's been betrayed. He needs to know how he impacted her. He needs to know how to be empathetic. He needs to know the kinds of things that he needs to do in order to provide safety for her. We can do that in couples work. And so I'm going to be educating, I'm going to be coaching here, this is what she's needing from you. She's needing regular check-ins. She's needing you to be sober. And here's why, and here's how you're, triggering her. If he's willing to do it, great. We start there, we move on. If he's not there, if he's not willing to do any kind of work, there's nothing for us to do. I'm not going to keep taking anyone's money because if he's not willing to do the work, then that's where we end. And at any point then he changes his mind. It's like, okay, well, we can get back into the work. Or another case, I was working with a couple where um, it so it came out that there was another active addiction going on. And so we started to do some couples work, but then it was like, well, the focus really now needs to be sobriety and 12-step work on this thing. And so could we have done some couples work in that? Absolutely. But for that particular situation, he went, got about a year or so of sobriety, and then they came back for some couples work. So it depends on the person. It depends on, the function of the relationship and how each of them are doing, and also the goals for each person, and attachment styles factor into all that. So there's lots of nuances and caveats to all of this. So it's really hard to do this presentation with a broad stroke, considering, all the different possible scenarios. But here's what we don't do in couples work. And this is where a lot of people find, myself included, finding my way into the wrong hands in terms of the approach. If there is somebody drowning, and by drowning, I mean somebody in active addiction, somebody who is not safe, somebody who is really struggling to um, walk with God, to do the right thing, to be a human who has good self-control and all these things, they're drowning. We we get to the wrong person and the therapist is really leading us to attach to that person. They're leading us to, hey, let's talk about communication. Hey, let's talk about date nights, and let's talk about, like, no, we've got a crisis situation here, and I'm not working on attaching to a drowning person. Even lifeguards don't jump in the water, they throw a buoy. And so, what we do in this situation, we're not working on attachment. We just can't. We can identify that there's an attachment rupture. We can identify what's needed to repair the attachment, but we're not working on communication when your house is on fire. And so that's what it's like when there's when someone's not safe because of addiction, gaslighting, abusive kinds of things going on. We just can't, we're not looking for attachment. So, where do we begin? So how do you decide, right? Pray. That's where we begin, right? Seek the healer and he will lead you to the healing. And then we also start in reality. And so again, when we argue with reality, we lose 100% of the time. So we need to live in the serenity prayer. What does that look like in the context of couples work? What can you change? If he's not willing to do work, we can't argue with that. But what can you change? Right. And then we need wisdom to decide, well, what can I do to help me given that he's not changing? And then if he is willing to change, okay, well, now what do I do with that? Let's work together to find someone who we can work with, and get specialized help or get a referral, and then deciding what kind of professional we need, right? He might need to work with a CSAT if he has an active addiction going on, or he might need to go do a 90 and 90 and a 12-step program or something like that. Or if he's got significant trauma, maybe he needs to be with a trauma therapist that can help him regulate and things like that. So again, lots of different things to consider here, but start with prayer and then start, seeking wise counsel. And I'm going to end on these last two slides, which is always a good reminder from Ecclesiastes 3:1-8. I don't know about you guys, but I always think about the birds song, to every season, turn, turn, turn. So Ecclesiastes, but there's a time for everything. I'm not going to read this scripture, but there is a time for everything. And that includes when we do what, when we do couples work, when we take a break from our own recovery, when we're working on safety, when we're working on grieving, when we're working on post-traumatic growth. And we need to know where we are in order to know what it is that we're working on. Because if somebody gives us the wrong thing to do, we're going to get off course, and we're just, it's going to be a waste of time. It's going to be a waste of money. And then I'm going to end with Jeremiah 29:11, which is a beautiful verse. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. And that is a promise for all of us, no matter what happens in our relationship or not. So I hope you're blessed by this information. And if I can clarify anything for you, please let me know. God bless.